Hi, everyone. This is Jason Berwick of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. He is former technology entrepreneur. I think he sold the company Stockhouse. He's founder of the Dollar Vigilante. He's also editor-in-chief of the Dollar Vigilante. And he hosts the popular Anarchast show on YouTube. Jeff Berwick, thank you for joining me again.
Yeah, great to be with you, Jason. It's been a while.
Yes, it has been a while. You've been busy. You've grown a lot of your brand very, very rapidly on YouTube.
Yeah, it's been quite a year. It's just everything's been going crazy. I think it's partly because everything I've been saying for the last few years is now happening.
I want to ask you about some of the current events going on right now. Why do you think the economic and political elites are implementing negative interest rates, capital control programs like FACTA, and are trying to devalue currencies almost nonstop?
Well, I think the negative interest rates is because they have really no other option. The only other option is for all these governments, the U.S. government and most Western governments, to default on their debt. So they've decided that they don't want to do that. If they did that, that would cause a massive financial crisis, economic crisis. It would require rolling back the government massively because it wouldn't be able to support itself, obviously, if it couldn't borrow money. So you'd have to see the U.S. government roll back by 90%, maybe even more, which would be phenomenal. I'd like to see it about 10% more than that, to 100%, but they don't want to do that. And we live in this world of Keynesian central banking now, where it's just a topsy-turvy world of just do whatever you want, print as much money as you want, and now go into negative interest rates as far as you want until the currency dies. So essentially, that's the road that we're on at the moment. So you look at the U.S. government, and they have currently $19 trillion worth of debt. That doesn't include the liabilities, which is over $100 trillion. So if you just think about in 2008, it was actually under $9 trillion. So since the last financial crisis 8 years ago, the U.S. government has more than doubled its amount of debt. So even just under the regime of Barack Obama, he has putting the country more into more debt than every single president combined, all the way back to Washington. So it's very clear the system is it's unsustainable. It's dead. It's actually the fact that we have negative interest rates now just shows it's dead. It's unbelievable. I actually did not expect to be able to do this, and that people wouldn't realize what's going on. That's how dumbed down so many people are now. But you look at it now, the Swiss government is now issuing 50-year bonds at a negative interest rate. So what they're saying is, hey, why don't you lend us money? We'll pay you back in 50 years. We won't pay you back all of it, but we'll pay you back most of it. And of course, Jason, you know, by that time, even at an inflation rate, the monetary inflation rate of even just 2%, I'm just doing rough math here because I went to public indoctrination camps, so I'm not very good at math, but at 2% a year, 50 years, that's 100, and that's not even including compound interest. So you would essentially be paid back with nothing in 50 years. So this system is done, it's over, it's bankrupt, it's insolvent, it's beyond unsustainable. And but that's where they put it now. We've got essentially Keynesian central managers in charge of things. And of course, central banking itself is a tenet of communism. So we're sort of in this communist central banking system that is mostly run by Keynesians who believe that you really just need to spend more money and go into more debt, and that's how you become prosperous, which I think even a 5-year-old child would know that's not true. So absolutely unbelievable where we're at right now, and it's just going to get worse from here.
Yeah, it seems the name of the game is to devalue currencies and increase taxes and layer them on. And, you know, they're talking about like these neo-Marxists like Thomas Piketty are talking about a global wealth tax. So people can't move their money from one country to another to reduce their tax bills. And, you know, the thing about Keynesian economics, it seems we're getting to the perverse conclusions of Keynesian economics from the general theory. He talked in the epilogue about euthanizing the rentier, you know, making capital plentifully available, just soaking people with credit and things like that, even the ones who couldn't afford it, so they could spend away their savings. And we've gotten to a point now where people, you know, who have saved and done the right thing don't have, they're not getting any investment income due to financial repression. So I think these negative interest rates, they are, like you said, they are part of a collapsing system. I think that people in power, you know, central bankers or whoever else, realize that the system, you know, could collapse at any time, and they don't really care what happens 5 years or 10 years from now. They're just trying to buy themselves another month or 6 months or something like that. Did you see that Japan was even talking about, you know, printing off, you know, more yen, trillions and more yen out of infinity out of their central bank infinity, buying up all the Japanese government bonds their people have, creating a new government bond that's 100-year debt, and, just devaluing that then all over again.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson warned about this. He said, if you allow central banking, you'll wake up homeless on the continents that your forefathers conquered. And that's exactly what central banking does. This system, as I pointed out, it's a tenet of communism. It has absolutely nothing to do with capitalism. There's no mention of central banks in a free market system that are imposed by the violence of government. And of course, central banks couldn't exist without government. And he pointed out Japan. Japan has been the worst in terms of debt to GDP. It's I think 470% or something. It's some absolutely astronomical amount. And so they've been really deep in this Keynesian central banking thing since they started to really collapse starting in the 80s and 90s. And all they've done is exactly the same as what the Federal Reserve's been doing since 2008, which is very low or 0% interest rates and printing lots of money. Actually, a lot less than the US has been printing, but they've been printing money and 0% interest rates. And that's how you destroy an economy. It does not improve the economy. Only Keynesians would believe that. And Keynes was an absolute fool who was a shill for the system. Just as you pointed out, Piketty, that's the reason his book did so well, is because he's saying what the system wants. The people who control the central banks want all this sort of stuff. They want to continue to put everyone into debt and to essentially impoverish everybody except for themselves. And that's what this system is set up to, and designed to do. If you just look at one of the best videos on YouTube is called, I think, The American Dream, or The End of the American Dream. It's a cartoon about how central banking works, and it's very, very true. That's exactly how it works. And there's actually Henry Ford in the early 20th century who was very correct when he said, if people understood how the monetary system worked, there'd be a revolution tomorrow. But they don't teach you how it all works in the government indoctrination camps on purpose, and they definitely don't talk about it at night on the mainstream television programming, and it's called programming for a reason. So people just have no clue what's going on, and all these communists and central planners all keep saying, oh, well, the problem is we got to keep lowering our interest rates, and now we've gone into Keynesian Kool-Aid drinking negative interest rates, which if I have to explain to anyone why that's absolutely insane, that you pay people to lend them money in a currency that's being devalued at a very rapid rate. Like I said, in Switzerland, in 50 years, most people won't even be alive in 50 years, well, unless there's life extension technologies like Rockefeller and Kissinger have, which I think is mostly just drinking baby's blood, but I'm not sure about that one. But you're not even going to be alive in 50 years. As I pointed out, with the 2% inflation rate, you're going to get paid back essentially at 0%, zero of your dollars back, and you're actually paying them to lend it to them. This system is so beyond done and crazy and insane. And as you pointed out, it actually hurts and anyone who's trying to do what everyone should be trying to do, which is actually make more than you spend and save the rest. That's how we have prosperity. That's how we have wealth. That's how we have growth. That's how we have all the things that we have in our lives today, is because in the past people have saved and they've invested that money into the future. And they've got a system set up now where we did the exact opposite. And if it lasts much longer, it's going to result in the impoverishment and destruction of nearly everybody except for the financial elites. And that generally is their plan.
Yeah, I think the plan is serfdom for everyone, where just inflation is layered on and taxes are layered on, and they take away your liberties and things like that. One of the things I get about libertarians and people who read Murray Rothbard and anarcho-capitalism is, it's all white privileged male Americans. I hear this from people who don't like libertarians. It's only, white male privileged Americans. But you've traveled all over the world. Do a lot of people in many countries hate government?
Yeah, actually they do. The U.S., funnily enough, is one of the most statist-loving, government-loving, anti-freedom-loving countries in the world. I'm here in Mexico right now, and while most people don't understand the philosophies of anarcho-capitalism or anarchism or libertarianism even, most people live it. Almost everybody in Mexico hates the government, and for good reason. The government is an unnecessary evil. It's an evil extortion racket, is essentially what it is. There's no difference between the mafia and government except for size, and most people here recognize that. That's why a lot of Americans think Mexico is really dangerous. They'll say, hey, look, they just lit a police station on fire and chopped off all their heads, or killed a mayor or something. And it's like, yeah, they really don't want to be owned by people and told what to do and be extorted down here. Whereas in the U.S., people have been so dumbed down and drank so much fluoride now and spent so many years in the public indoctrination camps, and then go home and watch the mainstream television programming, and it's called programming for a reason, that they just have no idea how enslaved they are, but they think they live in the land of the free. It's absolutely unbelievable. I actually find talking to a lot of Americans probably isn't that much different than talking to a North Korean. If you went to North Korea, I actually haven't gone because I don't follow rules well, and I hear that little Kim's not too nice if you don't do exactly what he says. So I've kind of just not gone there out of self-interest to live a little longer. But I'm sure if I went there and I went to a lot of the people, I'd say, what do you think about little Kim? And they'd be like, oh, thank goodness for little Kim. He makes us the best country in the world. Same thing in the U.S. That's what they say about the government. And if I said, what do you think about North Korea? They'd probably say, well, everything that I see on TV is that we're the best. So this is the best place. We're kind of eating bugs here and stuff and don't have anything. But it's the best country in the world. And the same thing in the U.S., which is falling apart. Every time I go up there, I call it a third world country. It's falling apart. It's becoming very, all the infrastructure that's been talked about a lot. It's just becoming a really poor, very unfree, very dangerous place, as we've seen recently, with a lot of people just getting shot by cops every day and things like that. And so many people get kidnapped. The U.S. has the largest people kidnapped and in cages and actually being tortured, many of them in solitary confinement in the world by far, by like a massive amount, absolutely massive amount. And I don't think people in the U.S. are any more criminal minded than any other place in the world, but everything in the U.S. is illegal now. So yeah, it's a bad situation in the U.S. and it's just going to get worse, in my opinion.
Through my podcast, I've met a lot of friends in many different countries, South America, Africa, like Nigeria. When I ask these people, how does the government treat them? Do they like paying taxes and things like that? They haven't read libertarian literature or anarcho-capitalism or anything like that, but they just know inherently, they have common sense. They don't like a lot of the government programs. They don't agree with a lot of the tax codes, and they're always looking for ways to legally not pay them to protect themselves and things like that. And, just because they haven't read all these libertarian books doesn't mean they don't have libertarian tendencies. You obviously have traveled to South America. You were involved with going with Luke Radomski of We Are Change down to Venezuela. Is there a growing libertarian movement and anarcho-capitalism now in Venezuela?
You could say it's growing, but when you say growing, it's growing from maybe 5 to 50. Venezuela is quite surprising. It's not like a lot of the other countries around, actually. For whatever reason, I guess because they went so hardcore communism with Chavez, and before that, it's got a very pro-communist bent to it. That they're not very smart. They're not on computers a lot, actually reading about what's actually real. So it's a little different. I've found in many other countries, though, in Latin America, including Mexico, of course, and then I would say to an extent Chile, Paraguay, even Argentina, even though they keep having these terrible governments, but that's started to change now. So they're starting to wake up a little bit. Yeah, in general, most places are starting to wake up. Venezuela, unfortunately, hasn't, and that's probably why they're going through what they're going through right now. I was just there a few months ago, and it was not a fun time. It was an incredibly dangerous, incredibly bad situation. It hadn't gotten to the point yet where they were running out of food in Caracas, but it was getting really bad. I didn't want to stay there. We planned to go for 5 days, and we left after about 36 hours. I just did not want to stay there. We were huddled up in our hotel. They'd have to barricade the doors at night so people wouldn't come in and rob us because they actually have strict gun control laws in Venezuela. So the hotel or even banks can't have a security guard with a gun. So anyone who has a gun who wants to rob you has just free reign over anything there. And it's actually become the murder capital of the world because of that. And I hope a lot of Americans listen to this and don't allow any form of gun control by the government, or they will turn into Venezuela. But I did meet, we at the Dollar Vigilante, we've got groups around the world. As you know, Jason, you're on one or two of them. And in Venezuela, we actually have about 5 anarcho-capitalists who are Dollar Vigilante readers and subscribers. And they met with me when I went down. They met me at the airport, and we actually had to run out to the car from the airport because they said that's where most of the robbings, kidnappings, and killings happen, is at the airport, because everyone's so impoverished now in Venezuela that they just wait for someone to get off a plane from anywhere else and just hope they've got some stuff that they can use because they have so little right now. And so we met with them, ran out to their car, and they took us around. We actually went to the barrios around Caracas where they lived, and it's actually much safer in the barrios, which is actually quite normal because that's more community oriented and people there to protect each other. And because we were with them, we were okay. But yeah, Venezuela, he told me it actually is growing. He said they started the Ludwig von Mises Institute there a few years ago, and every year the conference doubles in size. But like I said, it started with 5 people, so now it's up to, I think, 60 or 70 people. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen in Venezuela, but it's really nearing the ultimate end, and hopefully some people wake up there and realize that most of the problems were caused by communism, and I can verify that. Which exactly what I saw. I actually am the most anti-U.S. government person out there, and I would use any excuse I could to blame it on the U.S. government and their sanctions and their actions by the CIA in Venezuela. But no, this is self-imposed by the communist government problem, and you can just see that's the final end stage of communism, is when everyone becomes so impoverished, and that's what's happening right now, and it's truly sad.
Yeah, there's shortages of almost everything all over the country. I hear they're eating cats and dogs. People are murdered over. I've seen videos about people being murdered over stealing $5 from someone else. A crowd murders them and things like that. So I mean, it's just turning into, not the good kind of anarchy where people are peaceful and trading with each other. Not the anarcho-capitalism type of anarchy, but full violent anarchy where people are so desperate to even survive the next day because there's not an ample supply of food and jobs and money and things like that. So yeah, I blame Chavez, I blame Maduro, I blame the bureaucracy there, who no matter what, they just blame everything else's problems on capitalism and the free markets in the U.S., even though it's all the central problems with the central planners and the bureaucrats and politicians there continually making the economy and society worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, that's why I wouldn't call what's happening there right now anarchy. I know some people use that word just to mean chaos and things like that, but it truly is not anarchy. The problems are caused because of the government. People have been disarmed. People have been impoverished through the central banking system and through the redistribution of wealth and through all the communist policies. So what's going on there is actually statism. That's just statism. Everything's horrible. If it actually was anarchy, which would mean there would be no government and no one instituting taxes, there would be no central bank, there would be no gun laws, no gun restriction laws, so people would be able to protect themselves within actually weeks or months. That place would be doing excellent. In fact, so many people would be going there to invest in the country. It literally could turn into a place like Hong Kong within 3 or 4 years if they allowed it to be anarchic, to have no government and to allow people to do what they want to do. But what we're seeing there is the end result of just brutal statism, socialism, and the end results of hyperinflation of central banks.
Yeah, actually, that brings me to my next question. I was going to follow up and ask you, how bad is the hyperinflation there? Your boots were on the ground. How quickly is inflation increasing there on the streets?
Well, we should look at a little bit of history. I was in Venezuela about 10 years ago, and back then they had what was just called the Venezuelan Bolivar, and it had just sort of collapsed, and they just instituted a new one, and they called it the Strong Bolivar, because I guess if you just call it strong, then it's a lot stronger for whatever reason. And but they just kept with the same policies. And of course, when the price of oil started to go down, that was most of the revenue of the government, and most of that revenue just went to Hugo Chavez's daughter, who's now a multi-billionaire. So when they still actually just love Chavez, which is absolute unbelievable. I was in parts of town there called Chavista Town, and it's just pictures of him everywhere. And in front of all his pictures are people standing in lines, waiting all day, just hoping that there's a little bit of food in the grocery store. or to, maybe a little bit of toilet paper or something like that. But the people just still love Chavez, and they just ransacked and robbed that place blind. His daughter now, like I said, is a multi-billionaire, and I've seen a few of her pictures and heard her talk a few times. Doesn't seem like she's really smart, like she was creating all this innovation and creating amazing things, like maybe like Steve Jobs or something, and that's how she became a billionaire. No, she became a billionaire because they were just siphoning off all that money. But in the end, when the oil price dropped, they continued to spend. And in order to spend, there was only one way to do it, and that was to print money. And that's why they've gone into hyperinflation. So by the time I got there a few months ago, it was, I forget the exact numbers, but it was like 100 bolivar or 1,000 bolivars to $1. So essentially a stack, and here's the funny thing too, they call it the strong bolivar, and the biggest note that they have is a 100 bolivar note, which is worth, I believe, about 1 penny today. So you get a stack, like a bundle of 100 bolivar notes, and it's worth about $10 or $1. I can't remember exactly, but it's hardly worth anything. So we were in the airport, and of course you can't exchange that. If you tried to exchange $100 for bolivars in the actual government-run banking system there, they'll hardly give you any bolivars back. But of course, the free market, they call it the black market, but it's actually free market, always runs. People always find ways to get people what they need in exchange for what they want. It's called the market. So the first thing that happened as soon as I got off the plane from Caracas was a guy came up. He goes, "You want to change money? Change money?" And I said, yeah. And he said, come over here. We kind of hid behind some stuff. And I said, I just want to change 100 US right now. And I had a $100 US bill. And he filled our backpack up with bolivars. It was literally like a backpack full of money for $100. So you can imagine if I wanted to change $1,000, we'd have to back the car up and get a shovel.
Yeah, I think it's over $150 there now for a hamburger. But from what you were telling me about on the streets, it sounds like the people there have been just totally brainwashed with propaganda, you know, Chairman Mao style, Lenin style, Stalin style, North Korea style. And, you know, many of them sound like they don't even recognize that they've been totally brainwashed with propaganda.
Well, that's the thing with propaganda. You don't recognize it's propaganda, right? And it's the same with Americans who think they live in the land of the free, home of the brave. Totally don't, but that's what they believe because of all the propaganda. And yeah, it works the same there. And it's really amazing that this, you know, we're in 2016 right now. We have the internet that people can still get that propaganda, is that brainwashed. And you're right, a lot of people there, I didn't talk to a lot who were really hardcore communists because I didn't want to get killed because they're crazy. But I talked with just sort of regular people, and they couldn't quite figure out why things were really bad there. They said, yeah, the government's really bad, but although there's a lot of support for the government, at least 50% of the people in Venezuela still really love this government. But the other ones are kind of like, yeah, they've kind of been screwing up some stuff, and you know, maybe it's the U.S. sanctions. They don't fully realize what's going on, which is quite sad. And of course, if you don't really know what the problem is, you can't fix it, and that's what we're seeing today in Venezuela.
Yeah, supposedly using like the IMF or World Bank economic statistics, the poverty level has decreased in Venezuela, but a lot of it's not because people are pulling themselves by their own bootstraps out of poverty, you know, and creating businesses and building savings, and like the, you know, the working poor used to do in the United States to build their own businesses and stuff like that. People are getting more wealth redistributed to them from the middle class and other business people in Venezuela that haven't left the country. I want to ask you now about Bitcoin. You know, Bitcoin's been very popular. It's had a great rally in the last 12 months. Why do you like Bitcoin so much?
Because it has the potential to destroy the entire central banking system, and because of that, most governments. That's why I like it. It's actually a much better form of money than any fiat currency. There's no central banker. There's no person who can control it and print more money and give it to their friends. There actually is no Bitcoin office. There is no Bitcoin CEO. It actually doesn't really even exist anywhere. And that's the beauty of it, is that you can actually hold $1 million worth of Bitcoin in your own brain if you just remember your passphrase. And as long as the internet works and the power works, you can transact money. You can transact large amounts of money. You could send $1 million in Bitcoin to someone in China right now, and it would cost you about about $5, and no one could stop it. And if you wanted, no one would even know it happened, really. You'd know it happened, but you could actually hide it quite well, so no one would really know who got it and who sent it. So it's absolutely fantastic. It's very modeled after gold, actually, which is really interesting. It's actually fascinating and genius how they designed this. Whoever designed it, that's the other thing. No one even really knows who designed it. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's designed after gold. So in order to make more Bitcoin, you actually have to mine for it. You actually have to put in effort and spend money and to actually create it, which is why gold is such a great form of money and why silver is such a great form of money. It's the exact same reason as Bitcoin. But in this digital age, it's beautiful to have essentially a digital style of money that is very similar to gold and silver. And that's exactly how it was designed. That's exactly how it functions. And that's why I love it so much, because central banking, as you know, I consider mankind's two biggest enemies, the state or the government and the central banks. And central banking is such a heinous, horrible thing. To have a new currency that is exactly sort of opposite of central banks, that works so wonderfully. If people are listening to this and they've never used Bitcoin, I'll tell you, just try using it once. Try to get some, buy some on an exchange, or find someone who has some and offer them something in return, and then go buy something with it. And you'll be like, yeah, this changes everything. This is amazing. And that's exactly what it is. It's just amazing. I don't even call it a revolution in money and banking. It's an evolution in money and banking. And just the fact that the elites and all the politicians hate it so much is almost reason enough for me to love it. And of course, Barack Obama said a few months ago that I don't like this Bitcoin. It's like people have a Swiss bank account in their pockets. It's like, yeah, that's why I like it. And actually, it's way better than a Swiss bank account. It's power to the people, control of the money supply. And it was actually the Rothschilds who said centuries ago, and they're still basically running the show from behind the scenes, said, I care not who makes the laws. Give me control of the money supply. And I forget the exact quote. I always butcher quotes. But essentially, if you control the money, you control everything. And that's why these central banks are so powerful today. And if we can take that power back from them, we can have a world of peace and prosperity like we've never known it, because actually all wars would end. All wars are financed by the central banks and their inflation. If people got a bill in the mail every month for the Afghanistan occupation or the Iraq occupation or the Syria occupation every year now for decades in the US, they'd eventually go, I don't want to pay for this anymore. But they can pay for it through the printing of money, which is a hidden tax that most people don't even realize, that actually impoverishes them to pay for all these wars. And so I love the Ron Paul quote that it's no coincidence that the century of total war, the 20th century, was also the century of central banking.
Yeah, I like gold, silver, and Bitcoin a lot. I think Bitcoin is more speculative than gold and silver, but I think if people own all three, 10 years from now, I think they're going to be a lot better off than holding government bonds or holding fiat currency. I think, government bonds are going to be intentionally devalued. Fiat currency is going to be intentionally devalued. I think gold, silver, and Bitcoin 10 years from now will have some value compared to those things. In terms of Bitcoin, I think it solves a lot of problems in the marketplace. It definitely saves people money if they're sending money from one country to another as well. Normally with banks or Western Union or MoneyGram, when you're sending money from one country to another, there's a lot of people, a lot of middlemen working through that process that are each taking, large cuts, $50 each on even small transactions. So you're getting a lot of money there taken off the top by the middlemen. What does worry me, though, Jeff, about Bitcoin and the blockchain is we're seeing a lot of these central bankers in Wall Street talk about, their own private blockchain codes and coming up with new ways to, force people back into the fiat currency system with, blockchains on government currencies so they can figure out ways to devalue them and track every transaction and tax it and things like that.
Yeah, they've come out, the central banks and the governments have really realized in about the last 2 years that Bitcoin could destroy this entire system, which would be awesome, from my opinion. And they've decided to try to do everything they can to try to fight it, but they don't really know how. And there actually is no real way. The only way you could really shut down Bitcoin is to turn off the power or turn off the internet or both. And that's why they've actually been talking about it for a few years, the internet kill switch, because they're seriously considering it. They are absolutely considering turning off the internet because it's getting out of control. People are getting access to too much information. They're starting to realize they're so enslaved. And then they have access to things like Bitcoin, which could get rid of all the central banking systems. So they're actually considering that. But if they don't turn off the power and don't turn off the internet, the Bitcoin will absolutely flourish. And so now what they're trying to do is compete with it. So a few central banks have come out with their own cryptocurrency, they call it. It's a shadow of Bitcoin, really. It's essentially a fiat currency that's just digital format that they control, and they can print up as much of it as they want, and it's not decentralized. So it has none of the real benefits of cryptocurrency except for it's digital. And they actually want to get rid of all paper currency so they can tax everything, and no one can actually get outside of the tax system. You just automatically, every single transaction you make, even if it was just me and you, Jason, if you said, hey, can you, I'll pay you $50 to do this interview, and you send it to me, I'd get like 40 or 30 of it, and 20 to already be gone to the government. That's how they want it. And so that's why Bitcoin is so important, because they can't control that. You can track it to an extent, and there's all sorts of cryptocurrency technological advancements going on where that will even get much harder. So it's actually a real race right now. It's a race between them having total control over everything and tyranny, and eventually turning into Venezuela everywhere in the world, or the free markets advancing to the point where we can get rid of governments and central banks, and then we'll have peace and prosperity like we've never known it.
Yeah, I'm tired of these Marxists and these fascists and these Keynesians. It's just unbelievable how much, these guys screw things up, and then they blame it on the free market and capitalism, and then they get to keep doing more and more stupid policies, making things even worse. And then it's like a cycle where they just keep blaming free markets and capitalism. Now, you've talked about a debt jubilee potentially coming up soon. Why do you think that they would do a debt jubilee? Isn't that also one man's asset? So if the liabilities, one man's liability is also another man's asset with debt. So how would that get solved in a debt jubilee?
Well, when I say debt jubilee, I'm not sure how it's all going to shake out. But what we can say is that everything is super indebted right now. Every government is beyond indebted. The U.S. government, $19 trillion. Every major Western government's indebted. Most people are quite highly indebted as well. And this is actually an end result of a central banking system. At the end, everyone becomes massively indebted. So when I say a debt jubilee, that is a very long and complicated topic of something called the Shemitah and the Jubilee that I've been talking about. But so when I say that there might be a debt jubilee coming up, I don't necessarily mean they're going to forgive all debts. I think there's going to be definitely a washing away of certain things, and it's going to be it's going to be crazy. It's going to be chaotic. We're very close to the end of this financial and monetary system. It can't go on forever. It's unsustainable, absolutely. Now that we're in negative interest rates, it's obvious. The fact that the Federal Reserve is buying up most of the U.S. government debt, the fact that you pointed out that the Japanese central bank is just buying up everything now, shows this whole system's dead. So it's going to have to wash away in one way or another. And I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but I know the end result that they want is a one world currency, the SDR, and they're actually putting in the Chinese yuan into the SDR on October 2nd of this year, which is really interesting. If you follow the Shemitah and Jubilee, that's the actual end date of the Jubilee year. This year is October 2nd. They've also sort of laid out some plans where they want to bring in a new world currency by 2018. That was on the front cover of The Economist, which is actually a Rothschild propaganda, sort of a rag that they often put their plans on there. Very sort of they kind of hide it. They put it in cartoons and stuff, which is really funny and crazy. But they said in 1988, they had the front cover was world currency, and it was a phoenix rising out of the ashes of burning dollars and other fiat currencies, and it said 2018. And I can actually see it all headed that direction right now. So no way to know how it's all going to play out, but it's not going to be boring. And if you're not paying attention, you can get really hurt in the next few months and years.
Yeah, I agree. I agree this system is definitely unsustainable. I don't know how much longer they can keep the can going, but it seems they've been trying frantically to keep these asset bubbles going. They don't want to let the asset prices fall because of the debt problems. And the only way I could see them keeping the system going, even a couple years longer is by just rapidly devaluing the currencies to prop everything up in nominal value, while the people on Main Street who don't understand what's going on are getting totally screwed. Their job at work, if they have the same job, their purchasing power every year or two is just buying them less and less. Their tax bills go up across the board. There's probably going to be VAT taxes and carbon cap and trade and these other taxes coming online soon. Do you think the powers that be will allow a stock market crash in 6 to 12 months then?
Depends how you define stock market crash. You pointed out that there's going to be a lot of inflation. There already is a lot of inflation, and the only way to keep it going is to print even more money. So in that sense, it is possible that the Dow Jones could be at 50,000 within a year. But at that time, a Big Mac at McDonald's might cost $30. It's all very difficult when you talk about nominal dollars with a fiat currency system where they can just print up money at will, and the money goes to different places at different times. So it causes all sorts of distortions, massive misallocations of capital, and they just do it over and over and over until everything is just basically destroyed. So in terms of a massive stock market crash, it's possible that we won't see a massive nominal stock market crash. In fact, when I've been saying that I expect a major pullback or a crash in the markets, what I mean by that is that we could see the Dow go to perhaps 12,000, 11,000, 10,000. But by that point, what we'd likely see is the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, all of them go into QE overdrive, quantitative easing to infinity, and print up so much money that the stock market could go to 50,000, like I said, but everyone would be massively impoverished in the process.
Yeah, I think if there is a crash in asset prices, a bond collapse, banking collapse, the European banks seem to be the next shoe to drop. It looks like a European banking crisis is imminent since we have 12 trillion in negative interest rates. If there is a stock market crash, I think they'll only allow it maybe for 6 or 12 months at the very most, probably before the next round of quantitative easing comes from maybe a coordinated effort with all these central banks. They just don't see, they seem too scared to allow the asset prices to fall. There's a bunch of reasons why they do that. They claim they want the wealth effect to work. I think it's also for tax revenues, because if they can move the asset prices higher in nominal value, when people, sell the asset at a profit, the government takes a larger cut of it, even though a lot of the increase in the asset price was mostly just due to inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why inflation is so dangerous, and it's actually one of the most heinous things ever, monetary inflation. And for people out there who don't know, there wouldn't be inflation without central banks, because they print up the money supply. So the more money they print, the more the prices go higher, but it's actually not an increase in wealth. It actually destroys wealth and impoverishes things through the misallocation of capital. And you pointed out earlier, Jason, that during this process, people are going, maybe the stock market goes up, but they're going to be making less and less in purchasing power. That's been the case ever since there's been central banking. And so the Federal Reserve, third central bank of the U.S., they got rid of the first two smartly, but they snuck in the third one in 1913. They also snuck in the Income Tax Act on the very same year. Before that, there was no income taxes. There was still roads. There was actually still a militia. There was everything, but that's all part and parcel, taxes and central banking. That fell apart by 1933. Then they confiscated gold in the land of the free for about 40 years at that point, just to kind of keep the game going a bit longer. Then it all fell apart again by 1971 after the Vietnam War, and the U.S. was essentially bankrupt again. Then they took it off, the gold backing off the dollar, Richard Nixon. And that actually, if you look at every chart of any reasonable thing, it all changes in 1971. Since the gold backing was taken away from the dollar, you can actually see that people have been impoverished actually since that date. And the reason people get confused is because the free market, what's left of it that is allowed to function, which is people creating things like smartphones and things like that, because it's advanced so much as well. The free market's amazing. It can make everyone have amazing lives in just a couple of years, really, if it's allowed to function. It's advanced so much as well. So people say, oh, I'm doing okay. Like, I've got a $500,000 mortgage on my house, and the mortgage is a French word, mort, death, gauge, contract. And they're like, oh, I'm doing okay. I have a house. I have a $500,000 mortgage on it. I have a job, which I make $80,000 a year, which actually after everything I make about 40. But look, I have a smartphone. I've got this nice computer that does all this amazing stuff. And thanks to things like Uber and Amazon and all these things, hey, everything's actually pretty nice. Well, it actually would have been much, much better, and you wouldn't have debt for life just to have a house. But it gets masked because, and that's what communists, which essentially was what the U.S. is today, and all the central banks and all that, what they always leech off of the productivity of the capitalism, of free market, and that's what they've been doing. So actually, things have been getting much, much worse. If you think back to the 1960s, your average family in the U.S., the father would work, they'd have a car, maybe even 2 cars, they'd go on vacations. The mom would always stay home, take care of the kids, which is actually what needs to be done. That's part of the major problem today, is just sending these kids off to the government indoctrination camps at 3 or 4 years old now. So the people had much more purchasing power, much more wealth back then, but people don't see it now. So now everyone's like, well, look, I've got a smartphone, we've got the internet's awesome, there's football games on TV, but everyone's massively in debt, and everyone is just one paycheck away from essentially living on the street now.
Yeah, I think most Americans don't even have $1,000 now for an emergency. So if their transmission blows or they break their leg and have to go to the emergency room to pay medical bills, they can't. Most Americans wouldn't even be able to afford that. I've spoken with money managers who manage large amounts of money in the U.S., and a lot of them tell me they get approached by people ready to retire who don't even have $100,000, who want them to invest it, in only a couple of years and make millions of dollars, and they turn them away. They say, you have to save more money. We can't help you retire on only $100,000 when you're ready to retire in a couple of years.
Yeah, especially with 0% interest rates. So if you even just look back when interest rates used to be around 8 to 10%, that seems to be a fairly average normal market rate when the market is allowed to function. So even at 10%, that 100,000, that'd be 10,000 a year. You can almost survive on that if you eat cat food and stuff in the U.S. So even that, but now, no, absolutely not. 100,000 with all the costs of everything, all the taxes, you'd barely squeak by for a couple of years, really. And what can you do to invest it, to make money with it? You put into government bonds that are paying 0% or even negative interest rates, so you're just going to lose money. Or you can throw it into the casino, the stock market, and just hope that you make some money. But I expect we're going to see a fairly major market crash in the next few months. So a lot of the people who might even just be doing that right now, they're going to find they're going to have 50,000 in about a year from now or less. It's just absolutely just atrocious. And of course, people they think, well, the government's there, I'm going to get my socialist insecurity check, which is just always going down massively due to inflation, and it's actually bankrupt. It's not going to last much longer. So in a couple of years, that's not going to exist at all. Most people don't realize that. That's why the U.S. is going to be so bad when this all hits. People just are not expecting it whatsoever.
Yeah, I think there's going to be Social Security means testing. So Americans who have paid into the system for decades, they're probably not going to get a check, or it's going to be a lot smaller than they were expecting. And even if they do get a large check in nominal value, the purchasing power is going to be rapidly devalued. How do you think people should protect themselves from this? It seems to me, Jeff, that there's going to be a lot of rules changes. You've traveled more than I have all over the world. Are there a lot of rules changes by a lot of different governments? Do you expect that going forward?
I'm not sure what you mean by rule changes, but definitely there's a crackdown on moving capital. That's what the Panama Papers was set up to do, to crack down on anyone being able to move capital outside of their own country. Before that was FACTA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, which is essentially a capital controls on Americans, which made it almost impossible for an American to even get a bank account outside of the U.S. So they want to lock everyone down into their own countries right now. They're making it incredibly difficult, almost impossible to become a second citizen of another country. They've attacked numerous countries who were offering some decent ways you could do that, including Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic used to take 2 years to become a citizen there. It now takes about 8 or 9 years, and even then it's probably not going to get it. Paraguay offered a really amazing one a few years ago. Just took a couple of years. You didn't even have to live there and you become a citizen. Then the Paraguayan president went to Europe for a weekend. The US and the CIA came in and did a government coup, installed their own regime, which they do all the time. before that, Paraguay had a 0% income tax rate, income tax rate, and after they installed the U.S. CIA-backed coup, they immediately installed a 10% income tax rate. So they're trying to go around to realizing that some people are like starting to realize what's going on and trying to flee out of places like the U.S., both their capital and themselves, and they're trying to make it as difficult as possible to do so. That should tell you something. You know, people have to wake up and realize what's going on. They're trying to keep everyone locked in there. And so even things like Donald Trump talking about building this wall, I think it was Ron Paul who said a few years ago that he didn't think it was to keep Mexicans out. He thought it was eventually to keep Americans in. And it's looking like that's more and more the case.
Do you think then votes like the Brexit vote, where UK potentially has the independence, and you think then that these things, because the people that are running their central bank, their government bureaucrats are Keynesians, you think then that ultimately these things are going to mean very little then in the long term?
Brexit's a very long and complicated topic. I think they allowed it to happen, but I also think there is a uprising around the world thanks to the internet. People are waking up, starting to realize they're enslaved a little bit, starting to realize, like in Britain, like we don't want to be under this giant, monstrous, tyrannical technocracy called the EU, where you have regulations on every facet of human life. I think a pillowcase cover has over 100 EU regulations if you want to have it or produce it in the European Union. It's not even a democracy, even though democracy is absolutely horrible and heinous and anti-freedom. It's actually a disgusting, evil system where the majority can do whatever it wants to other people. It's absolutely anti-freedom, but they don't even have that in the EU. They have technocracy. There's actually 5 presidents, I believe. No one knows any of their names. Some of them are incredibly drunkards. I don't know if you ever saw Juncker or whatever his name was, absolutely blasted out of his mind. They're just a bunch of drunk communists. They can't be voted out. It's a total dictatorship, communist-style dictatorship. So obviously the people in Britain, some of them woke up and said, yeah, well, I don't want to be a part of that. So that was really good. But I think they actually allowed it to happen because they want to create a massive amount of chaos this year in this Jubilee year to blame on the coming collapse, which is all going to happen. It's all just mathematical. It's just unsustainable, as we pointed out. So I think they're going to allow some of these things to happen. And then they're going to say, if the markets really collapse in the next couple of months, they'll say, it was because of Brexit. You know, that you got to stay in this one giant government system, or we're going to have these really terrible things. I think that's generally the plan, is to cause a lot of chaos and to scare people. And everything's changed right now. It's highly dynamic. I literally work from morning to night. And when I started this in 2010, the Dollar Vigilante, I thought, what am I going to write about every day? And now it's like pick one of 50 things every day that's going on. Things are moving very fast, and people got to pay attention and do their own research and find their own information. Not going to get it from CNBC or CNN. That old saying that the revolution will not be televised. I didn't know what that meant until I realized that, of course, it's all propaganda on television. They're not going to tell you about the revolution until it's already over. So pay attention to things like your program, Jason, and others like it, who are trying to give people real information that is being hidden from them by the mainstream media, the government, and people like that.
Yeah, when I was at the gym last week, I was watching in subtitles on closed captioning, and CNN was saying, defending Hillary Clinton, they had a whole bunch of people on there saying you can't call her crooked because you haven't proved in court she has any corruption. So I mean, like, there's all these lawyers saying, oh, you have to legally prove every detail that she's corrupt. It's just unbelievable when the evidence is overwhelming. But these bureaucrats in Brussels, the other thing is that these guys are getting paid 6-figure salaries to destroy the country. So they can't be fired. They're being paid exorbitant salaries. They're getting, I think, another couple $100,000 each for all these ridiculous stipends for entertainment expense and family expense. It's just unbelievable that the taxpayers in these different European countries, they're unknowingly funding their own destruction with the people running the powers there. The people are, getting rich and fat. The bureaucrats are off the people who are actually doing the hard work, and the people who are doing the hard work are unknowingly destroying themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way this whole system is set up. That's why there's central banks, so people don't realize that they're being actually stolen from. Even things like democracy, that was set up after the sort of like the rights of kings. People said, "Hey, we don't. Who are these people? What kind of special blood do they have that they're allowed to take our money and tell us what to do?" They finally got sick of it, and then the elites back then said, hey, "Here's what we'll do. We'll start something. We'll call it democracy. We'll say now the government is you, and now you owe us money, and now we're going to tell you what to do. And yeah, you can change the face on TV every day, but you can't change the system." And that's, most people just still haven't realized it. But I think they are slowly waking up to it, hopefully. And if they do, it could be quite a dramatic shift in how things are in the world, even just a few years from now. I think we could see just a massive change. We're already seeing a massive change just thanks to technology. So it's incredibly exciting times to be alive. But if you're not paying attention, you can get really hurt in the next couple of years. But if you are paying attention, you could potentially not only survive everything that's going to happen, but possibly make incredibly amounts of wealth at the time. It's that old saying, that's when you make money, is when the blood is in the streets. And we're going to be entering into a lot of blood in the street situations over the next few months and years.
Yeah, I completely agree. And maybe we'll have another podcast about this discussion. I don't think, free markets and capitalism and a pure democracy can coexist, because then you get a professional voter class who always wants to vote themselves more and more free goodies, wealth redistribution from the productive class that's, building a business, building savings and things like that. So, in the long term, these things cannot fully coexist. I think at least a pure democracy. That's why, the United States was originally a republic, a representative democracy, to try to prevent people from voting themselves too much of other people's savings in the government treasury, and, politicians giving out way more money than they could afford. But I guess you have to have a central bank in order to do that wealth redistribution properly. You mentioned wealth changing things and investments. Do you think gold and silver are going to be like that, or do you think the powers that be, the people in power, are going to continue to figure out ways to manipulate the paper markets?
No, I definitely think it's going to do very well for a lot of people. The key is going to be retaining it, because we saw in 1933, once the government got desperate enough, they just took all their guns out, because that's all government is violence, and they stole everyone's gold, essentially, and then they devalued it, devalued the dollar immediately after. I don't think they're going to confiscate this time in the U.S., but I think they're so good at taxing and regulating everything that I think they'll probably, once things get really bad, they'll institute some sort of massive tax on any sort of gold transactions. So if you wanted to sell some gold for some dollars or something, it'd be like a 50% or 80% tax or something like that. So the real key is keeping it outside the system as much as possible, even outside of your own country. For example, if I told people in the U.S. in 1928, I said, get some of your gold outside the country, they would have been thanking me a lot. After that, but I'm saying the exact same thing now. Get some of it outside of the country, because it will come down to that. And luckily, there is so many ways now, thanks to how interconnected the world is with the internet and things like that. You can just buy and store gold in numerous countries with numerous companies like BitGold, GoldMoney.com, Bullion Vault. So you just wire some money in and have them store some gold for you in Dubai or Singapore or Hong Kong or New York, but I wouldn't put it there. Not if I was an American, I wouldn't, that's for sure. And London, if I was a UK citizen or subject, I wouldn't put it there. I would never hold a lot of my precious metals in the country that claims to own me.
Yeah, I think it's prudent advice for at least some type of diversification of one's physical gold and silver. There's a lot of gold and silver bugs that don't believe in that. But, I mentioned earlier in the interview about changing the rules. You talked about the government issuing taxes on gold and silver. That's part of changing the rules. So, you invest in something like Bitcoin or gold and silver as an American, and you think you did really well preparing for a devaluation or hyperinflation or worse, stagflation or whatever the outcome is. And then, after you already have a lot of paper profits, here comes new tax laws to try to, claw back your profits. Some type of windfall profits tax. The U.S. government has done this in the past in the 1970s with the evil American oil companies, making profits off of the oil shortages, even though it wasn't the American oil company's fault that there was oil shortages.
Yeah, absolutely. They always find a way, especially in the U.S., to take every last penny you've got. They even have a death tax in the U.S. So after you've paid all these taxes, all these years, you've been extorted, most of your money's gone. You're paying capital gains tax, dividends tax, income tax, sales tax, property tax. You can't even own your own home. You're just basically renting it from the government. And then after all that, if you manage to and get through all the inflation and still have something at the end, death tax, got to take the rest or half of the rest. People need to realize in the U.S. it's one of the most enslaved people in human history. But they watch their TV and land of the free, home of the brave, hoorah! It's and it's getting like that in a lot of other places as well. And so hopefully people wake up and just start saying no. It's quite amazing, isn't it, that we just passed Independence Day, July 4th, and that whole thing started over a 2% tax on tea that people went into a bloody war over, and now people are taxed 50% or higher if you add it all up, and people are saluting the flag and excited about how awesome, what a great country they live in. It's Aldous Huxley really nailed it when he predicted the future on that one. That just dumb down the people enough, give them enough fluoride in the water, put them through 12 years of government indoctrination camps. Put on the mainstream TV programming, and it's called programming for a reason, all sorts of propaganda every night, and it's amazing how many people will just enjoy their slavery.
Welcome to dystopia. Yeah, it's a type of controlled fascism where there's some elements of capitalism and people think that there's some choice, but it's like Animal Farm, George, another, dystopian book where people are still trapped on the farm, but they think that they have some measures of freedom because they get to choose their job, but they're still paying, high taxes, and there's lots of control points and things like that. Well, Jeff, I think we've reached our time here. We should have you on again to talk about anarcho-capitalism more for our readers interested in learning more about that. How did they find your Anarchast show and read the Dollar Vigilante articles and newsletters?
Sure. Just for Dollar Vigilante, just go dollarvigilante.com. If you just put your email right on the front page, we'll send you a blog every day that I write. If you're on YouTube, just look for Dollar Vigilante on YouTube. We do a video almost every day. This is the final days and months and years of the system, and I'm just doing as much as I can. On the anarcho-capitalist side, on the liberty side, I have the world's largest anarcho-capitalist podcast called Anarchast. You can find that on YouTube. And I also host the world's largest anarcho-capitalist conference every year here in Acapulco, Mexico, which I call Anarchapulco, expecting about 1,000 people next year. It's absolutely massive growing movement, which is great. So those are the three things you can check out.
Great. Well, thanks again for your time, and hopefully we can have you on again in the near future.
Thank you, Jason.